Welcome back to Serial Chronicles. Today we're here to look at a man who had no regard for the Hippocratic Oath and took the life of 215 plus trusting patients. The man that used his position and authority to secretly kill hundreds of people. Dr. Harold Shipman, also known as Dr. Death, was born in Nottingham, England on the date of January 14, 1946. Guess it was time for Nottingham to be known for something more than the sheriff and that famous hooded bandits. Method of murder was by poisoning, a lethal injection of morphine. Born into a working class family on June 14, 1946, Harold Frederick Shipman, called Fred or Freddie, knew a childhood far from normal. He maintained a distance between himself and his contemporaries, mainly due to the influence of his mother, Vera. This distance was to manifest itself in later years. One of the nosy neighbors noted, Vera was friendly enough, but she really did see her family as superior to the rest. Harold was her favorite, the one she saw as the most promising of 3 children. Damn, that's some mother. Vera was very controlling. She decided who Harold could play with and when. She wanted to distinguish him from the other boys. This went as far as the way he dressed. He was the only one that wore a tie, while other kids wore more relaxed clothing. Vera had 3 kids, of which he was the middle. His sister Pauline was the older, and his brother Clive was the younger. As a student, Shipman was comparatively bright in his early school years, but struggled at the high school level. Nonetheless, he was determined to succeed, even when it meant resitting his entrance examinations for medical school. He had every opportunity to be part of the group. He was an accomplished athlete on the football field and the running track. In spite of this, due to his belief in his superiority that was pushed onto him by his mother, this caused him not to form any meaningful relationships with his friends/contemporaries. The other thing that isolated him from having friends was his beloved mother. She had terminal lung cancer. As she wasted away, Harold willingly played a major supportive role. So this might be where Dr. Death had his birthing point. So every day after school, he would hurry home, make Vera a cup of tea, and have a chat with her, probably about his day at school. She counted the minutes as she waited and found great solace in his company. The time spent beside his mother's bed may have taught him the needed bedside manners he would later use in his practice as a family physician. Toward the end, Vera experienced severe pain, but because pumps of self-administered painkillers did not exist at that time, Vera's sole relief from the agony of her cancer was given by the family practitioner. A young and budding Dr. Death watched in fascination as his mother, distress miraculously subsided whenever the family doctor injected her with morphine. As the disease progressed, the already slim Mrs. Shipman grew thinner and frailer until June 21, 1963, she passed. Vera's death left her son with a tremendous sense of loss. After all, his mother was the one who made him feel special, above the rest. Significantly, her passing left him with an image of a patient with a cup of tea nearby finding sweet relief in morphine. Etched upon the 17-year-old's mind, it was a scene that he would recreate hundreds of times in the future as a possible reminder of that event. And when it happened, he would be a doctor, one with no regard for human life or feeling. In his early career as Dr. Death, he was hardworking and enthusiastic. Shipman fitted well into the social matrix, but all this he still fell short. He was an avid drug user, or claimed to be, with a prescription pad to fill his need, the ultimate cheat code there is for a drug addict. But with all things, this would soon come to an end. This aroused concern with senior partners of his practice. The receptionist, Marjorie Walker, stumbled upon some disturbing entries in a druggist-controlled narcotics ledger. The records show Shipman had been prescribing large and frequent amounts of pentadine in the names of several patients. By now, we know that there were numerous prescriptions for drugs on behalf of the practice. Although this was not unusual, due to drugs being kept on hand for emergencies and immediate treatments, the prescribed amounts were excessive. Pentadine, a morphine-like substance, was initially thought to have no addictive properties. Now, some 60-something years later, since scientists first synthesized it, Pentadine's non-addictive reputation is still hotly debated. With all this being said, he was forced out of the practice. So now, 2 years later, and many convictions for drug offenses, prescription fraud, and forgery cost him a surprisingly low fine, just over £600 sterling. Shipman's conviction for forgery is worth nothing. First, because his skills in this area was nothing less than pathetic. Secondly, he was incompetent in this area. This would be the precursor to a career of killing. The question would be, did he really self-inject these drugs, as he claimed, or had he already begun using them to kill unsuspecting patients? This is currently under review, so we would think this would be the end of his practice. But Dr. Death was back to business. His perceived drug addiction was a bit of a problem, but he convinced his peers at Donnybrook Medical Center in Hyde, in the north of England, that he was a recovered man. Dr. Geoffrey Morsley of the center explained, his approach was that I have had this problem, this conviction for abuse of pentadine. I have undergone treatment. I am now clean. All I can ask you to do is trust me on that issue and to watch me. Perhaps he was not watched carefully enough. Again, he played the role of a dedicated, hard-working, and community-minded doctor. He gained his patients' absolute trust, earned his colleagues' respect. Some of those who worked under him have told of his sacrifice and abusive nature, but he was skilled at masking his patronizing attitude in front of those he chose to impress. As for any signs of addiction, there were no blackouts as before, and no indication of drug abuse. In Hyde, Harold Shipman was home free and free to kill. So his reign of terror spanned over 24 years and responsible for at least 236 plus deaths. Detective Chief Superintendent Bernard Postless, who headed the original investigations, said, of the many reports, the conclusion matches up with their findings to date. He noted the death toll estimated in the audits broadly in keeping with the numbers of deaths investigated by the Greater Manchester Police during the course of the investigation. Even so, the final numbers are anyone's guess. Coroner John Pollard once speculated we might be looking at 1,000. But whatever the final count, there is no immediate plan to try the killer for future findings, nor would it serve much purpose because he is already serving 15 concurrent life sentences. Instead, other cases are being investigated as they come to light, with coroners' verdicts of unlawful killings continuing to mount. As they do, the question most asked is this: why wasn't he stopped sooner? Looking at this case, I have the same question, and I'm really trying to understand how could something like this go on for so long. Miss Woodruff was not the first to realize something was dangerously wrong where Dr. Shipman was involved. Later, undertaker Alan Massey began noticing a strange pattern. Not only did Shipman patients seem to be dying at an unusual high rate, their dead bodies had a similarity when he was called to collect them. Anybody can die in a chair, he observed, but there's no set pattern, and Dr. Shipman's always seem to be the same or very similar. Could be sat in a chair, could be laid on a couch, but I would say 90% was always fully clothed. There was never anything in the house that I saw that indicated the person had been ill. It just seems the person where they were had died. there was something that didn't quite fit. Being reassured by Shipman's ease at being questioned, the Undertaker took no further action. But his daughter, Debbie Bramberfer, also a funeral director, was not so readily appeased. She found an ally in Dr. Susan Booth. Booth explained she was concerned about the number of deaths of Dr. Shipman's patients that they attended recently. She was also puzzled by the way in which the patients were found. They were mostly female, living on their own, found dead, sitting in a chair, fully dressed, not in night clothing, laying ill in bed. So as we can see, his killings was not going unnoticed. So I have to ask, the mystic that brought his reign down, was it from greed, or was he just trying to get caught? Kathleen Grundy's sudden death on June 24, 1998 came as a terrible shock to all who knew her. As an active 81-year-old, she was well known to the people of Hyde. A wealthy ex-mayor, she had energy to burn and was a tireless worker for local charities until the day of her death. Her absence was noted when she failed to show at the Age Concerned Club. There she helped serve meals to elderly pensioners. Because the wealthy widow was noted for her punctuality and reliability, her friends suspected something was wrong. They went to her home to inquire and found her laying on her sofa, dead. She was fully dressed. They immediately called Dr. Shipman. He had visited the house a few hours earlier and was the last person to see her alive. He claimed the purpose of his visit had been to take blood samples for studies on aging. Shipman pronounced her dead, and the news conveyed to her daughter, Angela Woodruff. The doctor told the daughter a post-mortem was unnecessary because he had seen her shortly before her death. Following her mother's burial, Miss Woodruff returned to her home, where she received a troubling phone call from some solicitors. They claimed to have copies of Miss Grundy's will. A solicitor herself, Angela's own firm, had always handled her mother's affairs. Her firm held the original document logged in 1986. The moment she saw the badly typed, poorly worded paper, Angela Woodruff knew it was a fake. It left £386,000 to Dr. Shipman. She stated, "My mother was a meticulous, tidy person," she later told the Shipman trial. The thought of her signing a document which is so badly typed didn't make any sense. The signature looked strange. It looked too big. The concept of Mom signing a document leaving everything to her doctor was unbelievable. It wasn't a case of, "Look, she's not left me anything in her will," she later stated. Initially, she wondered if Shipman was being framed, but after interviewing witnesses to the will, she reluctantly concluded the doctor had murdered her mother for profit. It was then she went to the local police. Her investigation results ultimately reached Detective Superintendent Bernard Postless. His own investigation convinced him Angela Woodruff's conclusions were accurate. Postless was later to say, "You don't have to have 20 years as a detective to know it's a fake." Maybe he thought he was being clever. An old lady, nobody around her. Look at it, it's a bit tacky. But everyone knew she was sharp as a tack. Maybe it was his arrogance. So the case that brought Dr. Death down was one of theft, in which investigators found enough evidence to charge him with 15 of the multiple murders that spanned a long period of time. Serial killers often like to toy with their victims to reinforce a self-portrait of power before they strike. But Shipman's victims seem to have died peacefully and in a surrounding where they felt safe and comfortable at home. There's quite a bit of contradictory theories. Some psychoanalysts speculate he hated older women, citing comments he made about elderly being a drain on the health system. Others feel he was recreating his mother's death scene in order to satisfy some deep masochistic need. His belief in his own superiority makes this questionable. The fact that he left so many clues, some would say that Shipman desperately wanted to be discovered and stopped, that he was fighting a compulsion he simply could not control. In the end, Shipman committed suicide by hanging in his cell at Wakefield Prison at 6:20 on 13th of January 2004, on the eve of his 58th birthday. He was pronounced dead at 8:10. A prison service statement indicated that Shipman had hanged himself from the window bars of his cell, using bed sheets. Some British tabloids expressed joy at his suicide and encouraged other serial killers to follow his example. The Sun ran a celebratory front page headlines, "Ship, ship, hooray." Whatever the reason he decided to take his own life does not detract from the fact that he used his position of being a doctor, a respectable career that makes people feel safe, broke that trust, is something that I think is the most depraved and disgusting act of any serial killer. And I think Dr. Shipman might be one of the worst in history. Thank you for joining us in this week's story.